Okay, welcome back. It's been a couple weeks since I've done a video, and that's mainly because two reasons. One, I was just having fun, been having a good time. Retirement. We went down to Washington D.C. Highly recommend it. A lot of fun. I mean, we've been down there before. Went down with some family, had a good time. And two, I only tend to do videos in all honesty, I'm enjoying retirement. So I don't spend my whole day thinking of videos I could do for retirement. And I don't watch tons of retirement videos anymore. I watch a couple that are interesting. But for the most part, I've just been pretty happy with how things have turned out. And I'm living life in retirement here. So this will be just over 2 years. So recently I did the Roth videos because I pulled the trigger on my $165,000 worth of Roth conversions and just still working through confirming stuff with that with my accountant friend. So let's take a look at where I'm at. I do this all the time. This is where I'm at right now. It's been a little turbulent, obviously, with the Iran war. And this is where I'll be at end of plan. Funny thing is, I was looking at this. I really don't need to show end of plan because this actually shows at longevity, which is funny. You think this would almost say, what is it now? And then this would be, well, I guess this is current. All right, so I guess it shows current here, end of plan here. Okay, so let's get on with it. So today we're going to talk about fear because I'll tell you why. maybe you don't want to hear why. So I was obviously the Iran. I watched a whole thing on the Iran war that was actually very good, very very neutral. And I've been kind of feeling this way myself, and it just and obviously I knew the Iran war would bring things down. That's why I chose to do my $165,000 worth of Roth conversions during the Iran war. I never really thought of it from a long-term perspective. Could this go on further? And that would be a whole nother video. But it made me kind of think. And then yesterday, I got something in Google that talked about. I've been reading more lately, like not because I've been looking for it. It's just been coming up. And then when you read one, they give it more. Is Social Security that in 6 years it's not going to be broke, but they're only going to be able to pay out. The savings piece of it will be broke, so they'll only be able to pay out what's coming in, which is 77% of your current benefit, which infuriates me that we figure out a way to give all these other countries money and all these fraudsters money, and yet people actually pay in and don't get it. But that being said, I think we do need to have some solutions. So that hit. It was just a few things that all hit at once that made me start thinking about it. Even fear of like, oh man, what if I got the accounting stuff wrong and the safe harbor thing isn't going to work? So I started thinking about like how do people in general deal with fear and how do I deal with fear for the most part? Because I was really fearful, not fearful, wrong word. Fearful, I guess, to a certain extent in my job. It's kind of what made me a good software developer because there are other people just be like, oh yeah, this would be great and everything, and then they cut it to production and something would go wrong. For me, I was always really big on just making sure things are right and getting them done. So I started thinking about how fear kind of plays. How do I deal with fear? Because that's what it was. I was thinking of this yesterday. I was thinking of it yesterday and today, and basically all this stuff that I've been reading about. And of course, what pays on YouTube? Fear. So everything is like, we're going to have the biggest 77% downturn in the market ever seen, And of course, I reinforced that. Not a good idea. Today, over lunchtime, I started watching The Big Short with Michael Burry. And there was some funny thing somebody said. Like, he's been great at predicting the last, out of 2 financial disasters, he's been great at predicting the last 10 or something like that. He's always predicting some disaster now. But so I was hitting that. So all this stuff was just hitting in fear. And I was kind of just asking myself the question, like, when is fear healthy? Because fear can be really healthy, but fear can be really bad too. And it kind of all came around fear. It started out here. I'll just put on my screen. It started out with this question because I was very much, like you question yourself, especially when you're doing these big financial moves with Roth conversions. And I'm going to be doing a move pretty soon, probably in the next 12 months, to kind of rebalance my portfolio on my Roth side. And so I just started thinking about, like, you start getting afraid of, well, what should I invest? Am I going to lose money? Am I going to gain money? And I'm probably going to be looking at this. My balancing portfolio is probably going to be something like this. I think I'm going to look at this to balance just my Roth stuff. But so I kind of was feeling like this, and at work we used to call it whatever, analysis, paralysis via analysis. And that's kind of fear, right? Because you've got so many things in front of you that you can't make a decision, and you're like, oh my gosh, what's wrong? What's going on? And so just for fun, I went into Gemini and said, hey, what are some things about fighting fear? And I don't know, we don't need to get into them too much, because it gave me general fear stuff, because I don't want to spend too much time on this. But it also gave me, like, then it started figuring out, hey, I thought it was going to be contextual, but it didn't know I was thinking about retirement, how to fight the fear of retiring. So I thought it was interesting. I've definitely met several people that are afraid of, what am I going to do? And a lot of people ask me that too, but I'm sure for those of you that are retired, they ask you that too. Like, well, what are you going to do? And kind of the answer is, well, whatever I want, and I find my day and I things to do. And I think the key is, for me anyway, is I do watch a fair amount of YouTube, but it's not just stupid, like ridiculous, mind numbing, dumb things. It's educational things. It's things that teach me. And like I said, less and less retirement, more and more what's going on in the world. Not politics necessarily, but just what's going on in the world, the different people's opinions. So I thought that was really interesting. Addressing the identity crisis. Some people are really wrapped up in work. I hated my work, so I just wanted to get the heck out of there. Analysis by paralysis. This was some really good stuff, I thought, and this is what we got me thinking about fear with different stages. Like, there's fear in pre-retirement. There's fear like way before pre-retirement. Then there's like 5 to 7 years before retirement. Then there's in retirement, like what's a good fear and what's a bad fear, which we'll talk about in a minute. But that got me thinking about, I was thinking about this too when I read this about combating analysis paralysis. So I thought this was really good. Set a good enough standard. So this is really good. I don't think you need that necessarily in pre-retirement, but possibly, like, I would say like 6 7 years. Maybe an age is more appropriate. Maybe in your late 40s, maybe mid 40s is a good time to start thinking of, like, what kind of standard of living do I want when I retire. Limit your inputs. This is good. Like, if you just read and read and read, you're going to get so many opinions, you're never going to be able to figure out what's going on. So pick a few good people that you have confidence in and that you think are smart and have got a good history, and listen to them. Shrink the decision. I don't know. I disagree with this. Retirement planning is not about planning just 6 months at a time. I think that's a huge mistake. If you're in your 40s or 50s and you're thinking about retirement on the short term, you have a problem. Even 7 years before, you shouldn't be thinking of it in 6 months. So I thought that was bad advice. So anyhow, I was just thinking of combat. How do we combat analysis by paralysis? And one of the big things that causes that is fear. So let's just jump into this real quick. So let's talk about a good fear, or good and bad fear in way before retirement. Maybe in your 30s. Maybe, I think I really seriously started thinking about it in my 30s. And in that case, fear is really good, right? Because fear drove me to max out fear drove me to max out my pre-retirement money. Fear like motivated me to getting a reasonable house size, living in a reasonable lifestyle, saving a lot, that kind of thing, saving for kids' schools, saving for things for that, starting to plan. So I think generally fear of not being ready for retirement is a good thing when you're younger, as long as you do something about it. Clearly, if you just sit there and say, I'm afraid, and you never do anything about it, then you're setting yourself up for failure. So the next stage to me is, when is fear good? About 7 years, 8 years before retirement. I think fear is good there too, because it should force you to do something. So you have this fear. What do? You start looking at, hey, is my house paid off? Did I pay off my house? Did I go buy some software to plan? In other words, it's how do I alleviate that fear, and how do I set the goal? Like it was saying in here, over here on the right, it says set a good enough standard. So what you can do at that point is you get software and start saying, listen, I'm afraid I'm not going to have enough. I'm afraid that's typical people's fear. I'm afraid I'm not going to have enough. So what do? You alleviate that fear by putting the numbers into your plan. Whether it's Boldin or Right Capital, that's a great way to alleviate fear. And I think it's a great fear to have. You shouldn't have to live with it like all 7 years before your retirement, but it should hit you, and you should just deal with it. The other thing about fear that I'm finding, especially with retirement planning, is kind of emotionally detaching from the numbers. So, and that could go either way. Like you want to, even with this Roth conversion, I emotionally detached from it. I said, listen, my plan said I need to do it. I'm going to go convert this 165,000. I know it's going to suck when I have to take money out of my savings account or whatever to pay the 25, 30 grand in taxes. I know that's not comfortable, but that's the plan. That's I move away and I don't let my emotions dictate those decisions. The same happens when you're in that prior to 7 year period. You may get a number you don't like. You have to detach from it emotionally. So you can't be like, oh, I hate my job so much that I'm going to ignore the evidence set before me and I'm going to retire at whatever, 57, just because I can't stand life anymore. You can't do that either. You can't. And the converse of that is true as well. Like when I did my numbers, the big switch for me was my wife was I had calculated that she was in tier 5, which is a lower tier in New Jersey in the retirement system. So I thought she couldn't start collecting any money at all till she was 65. So that was all in the plan. And then when we end up revisiting that, we found out that she's actually tier 3, which allows her to collect at 62. And so when I saw that she could collect at 62 and how much instead of 65, that gave me 3 years where I didn't have to, I didn't have to make up for her pension. So that actually pushed me up like 12 months in the plan that I could retire. But I emotionally detached from it. Make decisions based on facts, not based on your feelings. And like I said, it could go the other way too. When I had the numbers in, I had a very realistic plan, spent a lot of time, and it was basically, I had a number. My number was like 61, I think, or 60. And then as things got better, and then we found out that Beth had this gig where she could collect at 62, then all that pushed the numbers up. And I said, awesome, I can do this. So obviously you guys have seen my videos. I'm pretty meticulous about expenses and making sure everything was good. I'm pretty reasonable about realistic returns. And so I made that decision. So to sum it up, I think 7 years before retirement, that you kind of think you want to retire sometime in your 50s, maybe early 50s, you start planning for, what number, what's my lifestyle. And by then you should know what your lifestyle is. So let's talk about when is fear bad? Fear can be really bad if it prevents you from retiring, right? So let's say you could have retired at 60, but you're so afraid you wait till 65. And the reason that's bad is because you just don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what health conditions are going to arise. Your younger years are way more valuable than your older years because you're mobile, you can do things. So living in fear without a plan and basically fear to stop working, fear I'm going to be bored, fear I'm not going to have enough money, fear, and it prevents you, and you become one of those people where, God forbid, like you turn 67 and you find out you have cancer in 5 years, and so you only got to live 5 years on that stuff. So that can be bad. Now, what about during retirement? So when is fear good during retirement? Fear is good during retirement. And I actually prefer, like I hook Boldin Right Capital up to my accounts for two reasons. One is I want to be able to just go in and not have to put in all the numbers and all that. I kind of don't. I would rather I would rather not have to just type my numbers in and all that good stuff. I want to see when things happen. I want to know right away. And for Right Capital, the expenses, I like to know my expenses all the time. So I like the money to, I like those expenses to feed in right away. So a good healthy fear is listen, I'm retired now. I'm not gonna become oblivious to the markets and the world conditions around me. And as I see conditions change, whether they're in financial markets, world markets, personal things can happen too. You can have a big medical problem where you got to fork out additional medical expenses or something. Like you may have who knows, maybe your car breaks down. Granted, I would have this plan, and you've got to buy a car that you weren't planning on buying. Like you have to, the fear, you should have a healthy fear so that when things happen, you can go to your plan and see, listen, do I have to make any lifestyle adjustment plans, stuff like that. So to that effect, I wanted to show you guys 16 minutes. I'm going to finish this up in a minute. Is use the Boldin AI. I have found this so helpful. So I just went in real quick and said, hey, if only my social, it didn't do what I asked it to, but it still got me the point. Because I'd read that article, I said, if only my social security is reduced by 20%, what reductions will it take to keep my plan at 90% likelihood of success? So it gives me the answer. It says, hey, in a hypothetical scenario, now I know there's a screen for this in Boldin, or is it, oh no, maybe in Right Capital. I know they have this stuff in Boldin where it shows that it drops down, but I'm kind of looking for solutions, right? I don't want to know problems. I want to know solutions. And that's what's great about Boldin with this AI. So it gave me that. It said, hey, in a hypothetical situation, and remember, I'm talking about inflation. I'm talking about compounding over all the years that we're collecting Social Security, something that would be very difficult to do on my own. Social Security benefits are reduced by 20%. Your confidence would dip from 99 to 88, which didn't freak me out. But it said, hey, to bring that confidence back up to 90%, you'd only need to reduce your total monthly spending about $64 a month in today's dollars. So it told me what it did. It said, hey, here's your current level spending is 12,257. Here's my safe spending target if I needed to adjust. And this was kind of cool too. It actually went down here. I hate the scrolling on this thing sometimes. That was one of the rules in software development, to make sure you never had these double scrolling bars. See, for this reason, up and down. Okay, but it was kind of cool. It said, hey, you should even look at your spending miscellaneous category or your out to eat category, which is very legitimate. So fear can be a really good thing if it's not taken out of context during retirement. Not having fear, believe it or not, this is kind of crazy, to me can be a really bad thing. Like couples, I remember watching this story. Somebody, I think I've mentioned this before, they worked their whole lives, saved, did a really good job, and then they basically just kind of, they had a financial advisor. They asked him or her, how much can I spend, da 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 da. And then they went out and they bought like an RV, they bought a new truck to pull the RV. They got in with a bunch of friends, not bad friends, but I think friends that were probably out of their financial league. And they started traveling the country in this RV, in this truck, and basically did this for a couple of years, came back to their financial advisor and said, hey, how are we doing, whatever. And they had totally trashed their plan. And now they were in real trouble. So I think being just so confident that everything is going to be great in retirement is a big mistake. And even when you think about it, like I know people with pensions, I have a lot better, right? Because the government will bail out big pensions. Like I said, the only typical of America now, everyone gets a bailout except for the people who actually do the stuff on their own. But it's like, you may have a state pension, like Beth has a state pension, it's through the teacher's pension. But if the state goes broke, they can't print money. And so there's still a bit of risk in that. Would it be bailed out? I don't know. I know there's I don't know if it happens at the government level. I know there's like pension insurance that you don't buy, but is in the system for bigger pensions. But we still, governments bail out pensions all the time, so you got to be careful. And you may even be have a government pension, but guess what? If we start tanking and they got to print a bunch of money, inflation's going to go wild. So you may have your actually probably a lot of the government pensions get cost of living. So I don't know much about pensions. So those of you that do would know more. But my point is, you should be thinking through. Hey, what happens if if something happens? You should be aware if of the financial state of your pension. And whether or not you should be considering if something happens, how should I adapt? Or what could I do to adapt? And of course, Boldin always has. It's this one, right? Yeah. Not that's inflation. It must be this one. It has, oh yeah, you can always do this too up here. Detail budget, like to spend or must spend. That's another way you can react. I think that's a bit of an extreme. I actually prefer doing something like this, just saying, hey, what's it going to take for me to get down to this target? And then it kind of gives me a number, and then I can go start messing with that number. So, what else do I have in here? Using Boldin AI when you have some questions about things. I even used Boldin AI for my Roth. Here, let's expand this. This was kind of cool too. But again, back to the fear. Now, my other fear is I've got to cover for like 4 or 5 years. I have to cover health insurance. That's why I'm doing these Roth things, the Roth conversions. So I asked Boldin. I said, hey, when my wife retires, we need to start paying health insurance. I want to keep my income low to qualify for AC until we get Medicare. How is my plan doing on that? Show me the table in a table for those years. So I put in this table. Here's the age. Here's my my MAGA, my AGI status, the federal AGI status it's used for determining ACA. So it gave me the 4 years. I was like, hey, can you please add my Roth balance to those tables? Because I don't always trust them. So I like, whenever you're using this AI and getting information in tables, always ask it to add columns that would help you think of things through, because sometimes it makes mistakes. So if you just look at this and accept it, I noticed that with my Roth IRAs, I hadn't deleted my Roth IRA after I did it. So what happened is I did a $165,000 Roth IRA this year, but because I didn't go into Boldin and delete it, it thought I was doing 2 of them for $320,000. So I thought everything was hunky dory. And then when I put the projected Roth IRA balance in, I found it was too high. So I deleted it. But you'll see, this is just in general advice. Give it as much data on here as you can so that you can find things that don't make sense. Obviously you need to know your data. So it showed this. It showed that I was 77,000. I spend it. I end up spending it the last year. When I'm 64. And then for the month of January, because my birthday is January 20th, when I'm 65, for the month of January, I'll have forgot something to do. I'll probably just pay for health insurance for the 1 month. So this kind of stuff is really handy. And it's all back to that fear. Like, you want to use the tools to conquer your fear of things in retirement, whether it's really early retirement. And like I said, the only real risk of planning too soon for retirement is getting discouraged, because you put it in. But I don't know. I don't know if it's ever too early to plan. Like I said, I think for some people it could be difficult if you go in and you do all this planning. You kind of have the expectation, oh, it's going to happen soon. But in all honesty, if you're like 45, I don't know. I don't think you can plan too early. Maybe 40s. Maybe at 40 start really sitting down and putting your plan together to make sure you have enough so you have time to recalibrate. So okay, so that was it. A little interesting tidbit for today on fear and a little bit of AI thrown in there. So have a great day. Thanks for listening. Sorry I missed the video, but that's just how it is. Later. Enjoy your retirement.